Welcome to the Better Business Podcast. I'm your host, Austin Zelan. Join me week after week as I interview high-level entrepreneurs on their journey to success, both in business and personal development. Each week presents new stories to learn from and new ideas on how to run a better business. Stay updated with all the guests we'll have by subscribing to this podcast. Welcome to another episode of Better Business with Austin Zelan. I'm so excited to have our guest, Tory Grayson, here with us today. He's going to be sharing a little bit about his story and how he got started in the industry that he's in. And I know he has a lot of business experience that we can all learn from. So if you're watching this and you're just getting started in business, or maybe you're already a seasoned entrepreneur, I'm confident that you're going to learn a lot from this episode. So Tory, thank you so much for joining me here today. Could you just tell the audience a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey, maybe even starting from your first job or how you got into the industry that you're in now?
Yeah, thanks, Austin, for having me. So that goes back quite a ways, and I did have some other jobs as a kid. I did start with some paper routes and did a few of those types of things when I was a kid. So I wasn't foreign to trying to make money and having to learn responsibility and get up and, go do a job and satisfy customers and all that. So I did start pretty early with the paper routes. And then actually, when I first started working, I was 14 years old. So I had to get like a permit, or had it with the minor working. And so it was regulated on the hours I could do. But I started actually working in a kitchen in a pizza house. And so that was pretty cool because the rush would hit and I'd be doing dishes and all that. But at the same time, we got to eat pizza and I got to help make those. I was just a 14-year-old kid. So that was pretty cool. And so went from there to doing a couple other restaurant gigs through, by the time I was 15, 16, 17 and just getting out of high school. But during that whole time, what was happening is I had an older brother who was in high school and had a whole bunch of friends, and he was 3 years older than I was. And so back in those days, and I grew up in the Seattle area in Ballard in Seattle, Washington, and at our high school, most of the guys were into fast cars. And so they were building high performance engines, and they were all taking mechanics and auto shop and learning about engines and brakes and all that kind of stuff. And so my brother was running with that crowd. And so there was a bunch of people that had souped up cars, fast cars, but nobody was making them look good. And so a lot of the high school guys at the time really couldn't afford really good looking cars. And the money that they did have was just going into trying to put some kind of a high performance piece on their motor. And so somewhere in there, my brother started thinking, well, it can't be that hard to do some body work and put some paint on these cars. So let's move from mechanics and start to look at doing paint jobs on these cars. So again, he was 3 years older than I was. And so he started to work on the cars, do sanding, spreading Bondo and fixing dents and trying to block out the Bondo and the fillers to make the panels look good, and started learning how to sand and mask and all these kinds of things. So I was just a little kid, and this is still when I was doing, paper routes and when I was just coming into that pizza house job I was telling you about. And so he would have me help. And so he was kind of the things he was learning. He was kind of saying, hey, do this and hey, do that. So while I wasn't doing it as a job when I was younger, I was learning it as a hobby. I didn't really realize it. And so we would bring friends' cars in, and my parents, God rest their souls, they would let us put them in the garage and sand away and create just blow the garage up with auto body dust. And they put up with it. I don't know how or why, but they did. And so we would sand on these cars, and I'd help my brother. And so I was learning the ropes and doing that. And so I already realistically had quite a few years of some real hands-on experience by the time I got out of high school. And then so right out of high school, at the age of 19, I actually took my first job in the industry in an auto body shop in downtown Seattle on Westlake. And so I went to work in the industry. And when I entered the industry, I had to start at the very bottom of the totem pole. And even though on my resume, I could put things like I knew how to take cars apart, reasonably. I knew how to fix dents, and I did. I was pretty good at doing all that by that time. I couldn't point to any real world experience. All I could say is I've done it kind of like as a hobby. And so I did have to start at the very bottom of the totem pole. And so from 1989 up until about 1995, I was working in the trade solid full time. And in that time, I really excelled because I had such a foundation and basically just a natural understanding of it, because my trade is it's both science and it's art. And so there's a lot of science when it comes to understanding the chemical process, understanding different metals and different things that are happening there. But at the end of a repair, you stand back and look at fixing a vehicle, it's very much a work of art. And so it's both. And I'm a very artistic person. And so in terms of comprehending science and the different chemicals and things like that, I was able to pick that up too. So so by the time about 1995, what was happening then for me is I was actually looking at going into ministry. And so I was working full time in the collision trade and had been doing that for quite a while at that point, and was really looking for just to be able to have a little more control over my schedule. At the time, I was trying to put myself through some schooling and work at a full-time job. And again, by about 1995, I thought maybe I could do something different. And so I took a huge step of faith, and I actually quit that job. I gave them a 2-week notice. And the idea that I had was to become a freelance entrepreneur in the industry in the greater Seattle and Bellevue and Tacoma market. Nobody was doing it at the time. Really, nobody's done it since. But the concept was that I would market myself as a subcontractor to all the various collision shops in the region. And I really had a strong hunch that it would work because having been in the industry, it was really hard for technicians to get a vacation, or it was really hard for them to be absent from the workplace for an extended period of time. For example, one of the really neat stories that I always go back to after I launched my business as a subcontractor initially was I had a painter that was working in downtown Seattle, and he and his wife were pregnant and they were having their first baby. And so he needed time off he wanted to be at home when the baby came and wanted to take at least 2 weeks. And so with them, I had already booked. I was basically on call for that gig. And so when his wife gave birth, they called me and I went in and filled in while he was gone so he could enjoy time with his newborn. And the shop didn't suffer any setback from their full-time employee being gone. So that's what I would do is I would fill in for guys that needed time off or they needed a vacation. And I did that solid for 5 years, from 95 to 2000. And I never once, Austin, had to market myself. It was interesting kind of how it took off because I worked with a lot of the different reps in the industry who themselves would be around all the shops selling products into the shops. And those guys knew my name and reputation. And so they would, if they came into a shop and they saw either some backlog or maybe one big train wreck of a vehicle that needed help, or they knew of an employee situation that the owner confided in them about, they could say, hey, call Tory. That's what he does. He'll come in and bail you guys out. You can hire him for a week or 2 or 3. That was on the long end of things. But anyway, so that's kind of how I got my start. And the name, I was just going to share that too, is Narrow Way Refinish and Collision. So that's the name of my company. Mm-hmm. And it actually comes out of the Bible. It's out of the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 7, and verse 13 and 14. And it says, enter ye in the straight gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and many there which go in there, because straight is the gate, and narrow is the way which leads unto life, and few there be that find it. And so that was just as I was thinking about what to call my enterprise and what to do. That was the scripture I thought of, being the narrow way. And even though I'm telling you right now, it comes out of the Gospel of Matthew. When I thought about it from a business standpoint, the tagline I came up with is because excellence is achieved by a narrow margin. And I thought about all the things that we do and strive for in business, and a lot of businesses are average when you compare them to each other. There's an average expectation from the consumer base on a certain standard of repair, a certain how fast it is, a certain level of customer service, where customers just would expect sort of an average kind of an experience from the company they're doing business with. And the more I thought about that, I realized from my own work history that it was really just those last little efforts of a little bit of percentage to try harder on that, or a little bit here, that really kind of separated between average and excellent. And so I felt like from a business tagline that because excellence is achieved by a narrow margin work well. So years later, I actually incorporated and I started renting buildings and I started hiring employees, and I kind of left that subcontractor model. And from there, it's just grown over the years. And now today, I have a couple different locations. And also with that, and maybe we'll get more into this later, but I also began to realize that there was some adjacent markets with my business that we could touch. And so I also launched another business called NW Bedliners. And that's a spray and bedliner business, because over the years, we did a lot of those, but we weren't really offering it as a company. We would just do it in line with what we did. So I separated that and launched that, and now we have that going. And we have in the works right now auto sales as well, because we're always touching cars and we have access to customers. And so that's another adjacent market we're looking at. But it's been about almost a 30-year journey now of being in business. So yeah, it's been a lot of ups, downs, and a lot of learning cycles. So that's kind of how I got in as a little kid and journeyed over the years, and it really became different things at different times to what it is today.
Wow, what an amazing journey. It sounds like you've really kind of followed step by step what you saw the right thing to do. And you took that, you did the best that you could, and then you advanced to the next level and the next level and the next level. But you really took what was in front of you and made the best of it, which I think is really, really cool. So early on in your business, what would you say were some of the biggest challenges that you were facing? Because at this point, you had all this experience, you had done it so long, and you've even freelanced. So it should have been a natural transition. But did you still encounter some challenges along the way?
Yeah. I kind of right away would sort of break that maybe into two answers. And number one, I would say early on, one of the challenges looking back, and that I would say to the audience now, is mindsets. And if you're going to go into business and you're going to be an entrepreneur and you're going to take the leap of faith to step out, my encouragement to everybody listening to this is to really just go big or go home, because we all struggle with insecurities. We all struggle with elements of a lack of faith or a lack of belief that we can do something, or that we can get to certain levels or reach of a customer base. And when you look at all the big companies that are out there today, like Boeing's a local company here. Boeing started it in a little garage on Lake Union. And Bill Boeing, I think is his name, was touching some airplanes and just doing some things, and it grew into this mammoth company that it is today. The point is that they all start somewhere. Yeah. And they grow from there. And so I would say, looking back, one of the challenges was just probably some of my own mindsets. And then, yeah, just various challenges, I'd say, into kind of what I would say maybe phase two or more, where I moved into a more where we incorporated and I started hiring employees and leasing properties and buildings and that kind of thing. There's always all kinds of challenges that come with that. I mean, I could go into hundreds, but just know that you'll always face obstacles. So again, as an entrepreneur, you have to be prepared to go out and conquer every day. It's not for the weak-hearted. You have to be prepared to go out and win and try again and stumble and fall and pick yourself up and keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going. All the big names that we could think of people who have made it and succeeded, they would all tell you very similar stories, where it was set back and move forward, set back, move forward, and just keep trying and keep going. And so, yeah, I would say that, I, was able to overcome But I don't think there's not a time where any business ever comes into what I would call a mode of maturity where they don't have to look over the business. Regardless of the size of the business, at some point, there's either an overseeing board or management or whatever that's overseeing the life of the company and the business. And so you can never take it for granted that you finally arrived and everything's just smooth sailing from there on out.
You touched on something very profound there, and this is something that I've seen in my business journey as well, where if I look back, one of the biggest things that I would change, I'd say the biggest glaring problem is that I would want to dream bigger. I would want to improve my mindset so that I was shooting for larger things, that I was aiming at a larger target. But I think that's actually twofold. So you need that in order to achieve more. First of all, you'll just naturally achieve more if you're aiming at a larger target. But secondly, you literally need it to survive, because when you have those challenges come your way and you're waking up and you have this problem to solve and that problem to solve, if your vision is not big enough, your business is going to die. So you have to have that vision not only to achieve more, but also to literally survive in the business world. So that's very interesting. Now, as far as growing your business, are there any strategies that you use that really significantly boosted your business's growth?
One of the simplest things, Austin, I would say, is sales calls. And again, just being willing and having the confidence to go make sales calls. There's been various seasons, again, just like I was saying just a minute ago, like if you come into a season of just management, the status quo of your business, where you're sort of in neutral and you're just managing the daily operation, you might find that you can lose an account or lose a few accounts where your volume shrinking. And sometimes that can happen quick and come up on you if you're not paying attention. And you'll come into a season where you're like, I got to go get some more customers. I got to go get some more accounts. And I've had those moments. And so one of those things is being willing to go out and knock on doors, make cold calls. And again, in my business in automotive, there's a lot of different, we have dealerships, we have insurance agents, we have a lot of different things that would be automotive related that I can go and call and knock on the door. And what I've found is that, usually fairly quickly, if I'm out on the street and I'm making sales calls for my company and I'm out shaking hands and doing that work, I've always been kind of amazed at how quickly I get responsive business coming back. And so kind of again, back to mindsets is you might think that, it's just too hard to get business, or I could never steal that account from that other competitor. They're just way too locked in and too deep in there and I could never get it. And we've won some of those. And again, it's just by building those relationships, by being willing to get out there and put the work in and go after growing the company. So I would say just straight up being intentional about that category and that aspect, because if you're not doing it, you're not going to get the fruits. You're not going to get the results. You can't just have your head buried in the sand and think that business is going to come to you, at least not in my industry. And so, there's the other thing is web and website and some of that to help with that. But just building a relationship in your market, getting your name out there and shaking hands, it's a good thing. I've done other things like doing community events. We do a lot of car show events where we're meeting our customers and we're getting our brand out there, shaking hands. And so building awareness, and I currently have our office manager does a good job on our social media. And so God bless her, she does a great job. That's not what I do. I work on cars, but she's pretty talented at it. So those types of things I think do help. But for me, I've seen just intentionality at saying we can win accounts and we can grow and have more volumes, and now just go get it.
Yeah. And that's actually something that echoes, I'd say, through most of these interviews, is that you need to have that network. And as the business owner, sometimes you just have to be the one that goes out there to the car shows or the community events or the events that you're sponsoring or putting on, to be out there and to grow your business. You spearhead the whole thing. from the start. Now, eventually it might get to the point where it runs autonomously, but at the beginning, that's a lot of times that's what it looks like. You can't really build something great by just sitting in your office at home or, in the office and trying to build something from your computer without ever building outside of that office. So that's a very important aspect of it. Now, when it comes to times of uncertainty, how do you approach decision making?
Boy, that's a great question. Number one, as I said, Austin, I try to be a man of prayer. So I inject that. And some people might look at that as maybe, I'd say, taking some time to slow down. Think about some things that are important to you and to really conscientiously think through ramifications of, okay, if I decide this way, which department is this going to affect? And, how are they going to feel about it? If I decide this, just an example, real world. I'm actually right now today I'm thinking of changing our office attire. And it's something I've been thinking about for a few weeks or actually a little longer. So I proposed it to our office staff. And what do you think happened? Immediately there was pushback. In fact, the first question was, are you serious? And so I was like, yes, I'm serious. And then you have to deal with the why and what are you thinking? And it's, as an owner, you're thinking about different things. And so you have to kind of think through that. So, but times of uncertainty, we went through another, I would say belief and faith and putting in the work. In 2008 and 9, in the economic crash, we were actually just expanding at that time. And I was going bigger at that time. And right then, banks started stopping loaning, and the money in the around the globe was, banks were calling money back. It was a bleak time, is what I'm trying to say. And so I found myself like, wow, I'm trying to do this thing, and it's like the whole world economy is falling apart right now. I just kept going, Austin, and I just every day kept putting my shoes on. I kept putting in the work. I just kept showing up. And so sometimes, even in the face of uncertainty, even if you don't know what to do, I'd say just keep showing up. And then on the decision making, I'd say slow down on it. Don't be hasty and quick on that. I try not to be. I try to think about who it's going to affect. I try to put myself in their shoes and think through my decisions, backwards, like what it's going to be. And there's times where I've had to make decisions where I felt the company needed it, even if there was going to be pushback, even if employees were going to leave. Sometimes as an owner, companies have to make decision where the company's going and not let the tail wag the dog. You have to be the head. You have to be comfortable with being the head as an owner and making those decisions, but I still try to do it with a heart of kindness and with a wide scope of understanding and feedback.
Definitely. Now, what role does company culture play in your business, and how do you cultivate it?
Company culture. Yeah, that one I would say is important, but the issue with company culture is if you're not intentional about your culture, a culture will develop and it may not be the one you want. If you're not actively trying to introduce and inject culture phenomenon and things that you want your business to look like, how you want it to function, how you want that pervasive culture to be every day. And so we've done some things over the years. One of the things we do is we do have at least monthly meetings. We have frequent office meetings. I have production meetings and those types of things. So I try to pull some feedback, and we can talk about how are our schedules? How do we like our start and stop times on the day? Because several of my employees, we let them stagger their schedules. It's part of our culture. So my thing with them is, as long as your work's done for the week and it's not impacting our customers negatively, I'm okay if you come in late, or if you leave early, you want to come in early and leave early, types of those things. So that's part of our culture, but we kind of monitor it. But the key thing I'll say on that is definitely, if you're not doing anything about it, you might be telling yourself that you don't have a culture, but you absolutely have a culture in the building, out on the field, whatever it is of your industry.
Definitely. And maybe somebody's watching this and they're like, wow, I didn't even realize that I had a culture in my company. But that's very, very true. If you're not cultivating something intentionally, something is going to come up on its own. There's no such thing as a no culture situation in a company, because something will create that culture. And if you're not the one spearheading it and being intentional about it, you don't really have control over that, and you can't condition that culture to be what you need it to be. So
yeah, one other thing on there, if I can, just again for the audience, Austin, is, and again, as a leader and as a discerning leader, I've had multiple times where I've had a bad apple in terms of an employee that was in as part of a staff who was negatively affecting the whole morale and the whole culture of the staff, where I've had to deal with it. And I've probably, one of my negatives that I've tried to grow in is that sometimes I've been too slow. I've been too kind to deal with like employee issues, but those are going to happen. And so again, my advice and where I've grown to is to deal with those quickly, because one bad apple out there negatively will bring the morale down and really start to sway your culture. And so, like how my business operates, a lot of times I'm in my office and I might not even see what's happening out in the parking lot, or what's happening out in my building, or what's happening with our vendors, or what's happening with insurance adjusters that are in the building. So some of that I might not even see, that I have other people, other employees or other customers or vendors bringing it up to me. Hey, this happened. I just thought you should know about it. Those types of things. So you got to deal with those quick.
Yeah, that's a really good point. They say you should hire slow, fire quick. So now when it comes to industry trends and new things that are coming up on the horizon, how do you keep up with all these things that are brand new in the industry? How do you know which ones you want to implement, which ones you want to stay away from? Do you have a decision-making process around that?
We do. And I would say it's almost back to maybe a little bit of culture. But there are a lot of trends in the automotive world and in the collision industry. And just to take you back even to 08 and 09, one of the things in our industry that we had said as collision guys and as auto body shop owners or workers is that we actually bragged that we were in one of the few, if not only, recession-proof industries, because everybody drives and everybody wrecks their cars. And so the collisions, they just keep coming in. Well, and in my lifetime, what we found in 08 and 09, there was a huge impact on the collision industry. We'd never seen it, not like in my lifetime. And really, the automobile is fairly recent, 100 years or so. I mean, give or, a little bit more than that. But when that happened, people, again, were losing their jobs. They were losing their homes. Paychecks or just income was very uncertain. So that also people stopped driving, Austin. So collisions in our industry is almost a mathematical formula that the miles driven by Americans almost equates to a certain amount of collisions per year.
Wow.
And of those collisions across the country is divvied up into the footprint of the auto body shops that are in the country, probably about 50,000 or so.
Do you know that number off the top of your head, by the way?
The number?
Yeah. How many miles
collisions?
driven to collisions?
I don't know the number, but I know it's been debated, but there's probably a range.
Yeah.
But the point is that it's a real comparison.
Yeah.
And so in 08 and 09, people that were wrecking their cars, they stopped bringing them in. They would just hold their claim money because they might have needed it for groceries. They maybe needed it for their mortgage payment. So for the first time in my career, we started seeing people not fix their cars and those collisions not coming into our industry. And so we found out that our industry was not recession proof. So that was one, I would say, for trends. The other thing is we all know how sophisticated vehicles have gotten over the years. And so a lot of those things on collision avoidance and radar systems and lane departure, anti-lane departure systems. Some of that stuff we will do. Others it might be more dealer specific. And so we just kind of monitor it case by case, where we, again, have relationship with our dealerships where we'd send it to their service centers and we monitor that. Outside of that, I would say that the trends, there's a lot of trade magazines and there's a lot of trade like regional events that we can go to stay current on various products of SEMA, for example. You and I have talked about SEMA before.
Yeah.
Things like that, where you can go and look at trends, see new tools coming out, see how they function and where they fit, and some of those things. So I try to read trade magazines and go to, shows like SEMA or something like that to kind of stay aware at least of any new trends that are coming.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. This has been really interesting so far. Thank you for sharing that. Now, when it comes to like challenges or setbacks that you've had in your business, could you share an example of maybe a challenge that you experienced that became a learning opportunity for the business?
Yeah, we've had some setbacks. I guess how I would answer that is, Austin, is just as a human being, because we're not machines as entrepreneurs and business owners. Just as a human being, and from our emotional capacity and our mental space and our ability to get up every day and deal with problems or setbacks is going to be key. Your ability to do that. So I would just say, I know that I have grown as a person over the years to be able to handle those. And so I can't think of a specific one necessarily right now, but what I can say is in my journey in terms of that question, have been keenly aware of, because we honestly have a lot of setbacks, and the scale can be very wide. From one of the big setbacks, Austin, I'll tell you this, is in 2013, I want to say, we did have a location in Bellevue. And you're from here, and not all your audience might know where that is, Bellevue, Washington, but the city of Bellevue put in the light rail system. And at that time where they were putting that in, it was going right across a swath of the city of an area which was almost the whole auto body row for Bellevue, where they had allowed body shops to exist. My location was in that area, and we were getting moved. And so we were sort of scrambling to find a new location and to carry that location on. But at the same time, so were a bunch of other people. And real estate was, the rents and everything was going up. And the available square footage footprint for that area of Bellevue was getting beat. And there was a lot of uncertainty. And so what we ended up doing in that time was actually letting that location go. And we consolidated everything back to our north end location at the time. And we didn't really see that coming. It was a curveball. It was a setback. So I guess to your question, what we did, though, I felt like in the end was good. And then for the next quite a few years, I kind of kept looking at that market. But it never really, today it looks a little different, but 10, 11 years ago, I would say, and through this whole time frame, it hasn't looked great. However, at that time, I did put in a lot of work to keep a lot of our customers. So how to overcome that setback? We did retain a handful of customers that we were doing business with. And to this very day, I still do business with a lot of those people. But just to kind of punctuate that, I would say you have to grow as a human being from, again, your emotions and your mind. From that was a macro setback, all the way down to small little things like we might fix a car and it might be ready for delivery. We've already notified the customer to come pick up, and say something like one of our lawn attendants is parking it and ends up scratching the panel that we just fixed. And so that's a small little setback, but it's still like, what are we going to do? Okay, let's learn from this. What happened? What do we need to do different? So it's kind of macro to micro, but to learn and to just to keep moving forward in each setback.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely a huge key in business to take these setbacks and failures and challenges and learn from every single one of them as much as we can. So that way it's not a waste. You know, you either win or you get a learning opportunity.
Yeah, they're going to be huge learning opportunities. That's the key, is that don't let a setback or a challenge go to waste.
Yeah.
Because in those, they're loaded with learning opportunities.
Yeah. So when it comes to your products and services that you offer as a company, what do you do to ensure that these products and services constantly exceed customer expectations?
One of the basic things I do, Austin, is and I have another general manager, but we do inspect everything. And so I've
like a quality control type of system.
Yeah, I've really forced myself over the years to do that, because sometimes, even with all the best intentions in the world, sometimes things should get missed. And so we aim to not let that happen. And so I think a robust system of quality control, a check, if you're in a service business, for sure, where you're presenting a finished product to a customer, where you just have to have that in place. And that can look various ways. You can have sheets that you have checkoffs where, somebody's, and we do a little bit of that as well, where every line item has to be checked that it was done and accomplished. But still at the very end, somebody really should be inspecting the product, making sure that it is what that the customer was expecting, before you're ready to deliver it. I would just say you just have to do that. And then the other thing I'll say, and again, in all honesty, is if you have something that's a failure in terms of what you are trying to do for the customer, and you didn't give them the service or the product that they thought they were getting, you just bend over backwards and give them the Nordstrom experience. Just, hey, we're going to take care of that right away. And I've had to do that many, many times. And I've had a lot of customers that have so appreciated even that, just a quick response to say, no questions asked, we're going to make it good. We've got, reviews on Yelp or Google, things like of that nature. Hey, this happened, but they were so good to make it, right. And so I'd say, if you miss it, again, make it an opportunity to win and keep that customer long-term by how you handle them in that bad situation. That goes a long ways.
Yeah, definitely. Now, when it comes to running a successful business, one of the key things is having the right talent. So how do you attract and retain the top talent in your industry?
Yeah, we obviously interview. And so one of the things that I do is I try to assess somebody's skill level right up front. And I'm not afraid to hire somebody that is more green or is an apprentice. And actually, I will say that years ago, I kind of didn't want to be have a training program in my shop, because we're a smaller independent. In my industry, in the collision industry, and probably a lot of your audience would know companies like Gerber Collision and Glass. They're national. They're nationwide. They're all over. Caliber's another one. Those companies are huge, and they're in all 50 states and very large companies. So my philosophy years ago was, I'll let them take in the new techs or the techs coming out of trade schools and high school trade programs, let them develop them for a few years, and then we'll hire them later. My philosophy's changed a little bit on that, because post-COVID, we still are experiencing a large labor pool, where there's a lot of people still out of the labor pool, and a lot of people actually, we talk about trends in our industry where we've noticed probably in the last 10 years, maybe a little more, a slower stream of techs coming into the industry. And so now we're open, if we're in a good season for it, to bring on somebody who's more green and put them in a apprentice type role. But outside of that, I have a chart, Austin, of what I would call like level 1, level 2, level 3, that describes duties and knowledge and skill for all the technicians. And they basically have to meet those levels to be considered that level of a technician. And so usually on referrals and references and calling on that and verifying that type of thing, a lot of the standard stuff that your audience would think of, just to make sure. And again, a lot of times I've had somebody say, hey, I'm this and that. You hire them, and it turns out they're really quite not maybe that. And so in a case like that, I'm also a believer in looking at sort of a redirect or repositioning of a person. Sometimes they're not open to that. But again, as an owner, I've had to make the decision to say, well, how we have you and what we talked about is not really working. So let's sort of redefine that. And sometimes they'll be open to that. Sometimes they want to move on. But I try to just screen them pretty good up front. And a lot of times you win, sometimes you don't. And as far as search, we've used different career finding type websites and things like that. I've used quite a few of them.
Yeah, definitely. So as we wrap up here, how important would you say networking and relationship building is in business?
I would say it's huge. Yeah, I would say, again, back to just outside sales calling. And the more you network, the more you make a name for yourself, the more you strive to realize you're developing a reputation, and also realizing you may be developing a reputation or name that's going further with people you don't even know. And so you have to be careful about what that is, because in my industry, and I'm not going to mention names, but over the years, there's been a lot of bad apple names out there in the trade, whether it's managers or estimators or owners or whatever the case may be, where you drop a name and everybody's like, oh, and so right away, there's this big reputation. And so networking, getting out there, meeting different people, different businesses, different events, and also, really trying to maintain your reputation, your name. That's gold. That'll go a long ways. We've had over the years, I couldn't even count the times where I've had somebody say, hey, you were referred by so-and-so, and so we want to come in to get our vehicle repaired. And the so-and-so that they mentioned, I have no idea. It's like, I don't even know how they got our name. But we have people we don't even know that are referring us because we have a brand and a reputation for what we do.
Yeah, that's awesome. Alrighty. So are there any final words of wisdom you want to leave our audience with today?
Yeah, I would just say, if you are considering going into business, number one, I would say realize that you have to get up every day and be ready to go into battle. Yeah. It's not a walk in the park, so it's not for the faint of heart. So I would just tell everybody, if that's what you're thinking of, you can do it, but it's not for the faint of heart. Realize you've got to just hit it hard every day. And I would say, go big right out of the gate. I would give myself maybe a C- on something like that, Austin, and say, as I look back, I wish over the years, and even up to even today, that I would be hitting things harder. Mm-hmm. So I would say, the word of advice, if you're going into business or thinking about starting a company or starting a venture, hit it hard right out of the gate. Go as big as possible and just go crazy with it. Just to make it as big as you can, as quick as you can.
Awesome. Well, hey, Tory, thank you so much for joining me here today. Awesome. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for joining us and for paying attention to the wisdom that he shared with us today. I think he shared a lot based on his experience, and remember to always dream big and to shoot for bigger things that you might even imagine, because you not only need that to maintain a business, but sometimes you quite literally need it to survive in your industry and keep your business afloat. Thank you guys for joining us. This is Better Business with Austin Zelan.